Today at the National Press Club, German Federal Minister of Defence Boris Pistorius. Minister Pistorius will discuss the strengthening ties between Berlin and Canberra and address the shared security challenges facing the Indo-Pacific and European regions. Boris Pistorius with today's National Press Club address.
Well, willkommen and guten Tag to all of our German friends in the audience today and to everybody who's come here for this National Press Club address today, today's Westpac address. My name is Anna Henderson. I am a club director and the SBS chief political correspondent, and our principal guest today is Boris Pistorius, German Federal Minister for Defence. He will be joined by Professor Rory Medcalf, who is the head of the National Security College at the Australian National University during the question and answer session, and I will conduct an in-conversation with our guests and take questions from the working press as well. The theme of today's address is Germany and Australia, partners in an era of strategic competition. Boris Pistorius has been a Federal Minister for Defence since January the 19th in 2023. Before, from 2013 on, he was the Minister for the Interior and Sport in Lower Saxony. And previously he was a Lord Mayor and he studied law and did military service as well. So an esteemed person for us to hear from at an extraordinary time in the world, I think we can all agree. I'm very interested to hear the questions that come from our Australian and German media, and I welcome you to the stage.
Dear Mrs. Henderson, Mr. Riley, Professor Metcalf, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, members of Parliament from Germany and beyond, and it is a great honor. It is a great honor to be here today. Since their foundation, both the National Security College and the National Press Club have become leading fora for strategic thinking and debates on global issues. Having come from Germany to Japan, Singapore, and now Australia, I can say with conviction, travel truly broadens the mind. When you travel this far, 16,000 kilometers, you quite literally turn your mental map of the world upside down. I tend to start my speeches talking about a topic that I'm at least as passionate about as international politics, sports. Be it footy, cricket, or my favorite sport, soccer. All of them have one thing in common. Being a team player matters. It is a team spirit that overrides individual talent. And the bottom line is, cooperation in the team is crucial. Ladies and gentlemen, what is true in sport is even more true in politics today, especially at a time when the global landscape is becoming more complex and less stable, when rules are being questioned and attacked, when more and more players in international politics choose acting alone over acting together. In times like these, when nationalism is on the rise around the world, we must not forget today's world is more and more interconnected, day by day, whether we like it or not. Conflicts, economic crises, natural disasters, they occur in one region of the world, but their cause might be rooted in another region far away. In today's security environment, geographic distance no longer guarantees security. Many of the current conflicts and wars are linked to one each other. Theaters of conflict may appear regional, but security today is global. The war in Ukraine shows these interdependencies day after day, battle after battle. Drones used to attack Ukraine cities are made in Iran and supplied to Russia. Trains loaded with North Korean artillery shells travel thousands of kilometers across Russia all the way to the front line in Ukraine. Thousands of North Korean soldiers have been fighting alongside Russian troops in Ukraine. All this helps Russia sustain its war effort and strengthens the political and military ties between Moscow and Pyongyang. The relationship between Iran and Russia also connects the war in the Middle East with the war in Ukraine. In exchange for Iranian drones, Russia has reportedly shared intelligence with Iran to help the regime identify potential targets. Moscow is also supporting Iran with advanced drone tactics based on battlefield experiences from its war in Ukraine. These tactics have been used to hit US and Gulf nation targets in the Middle East. Kiev has sent drone interception experts to the Gulf in order to share Ukrainian know-how in countering the low-cost but high-effective Shahed drones. While all of this is happening, Beijing has taken a cautious but strategic position. China is careful not to be directly involved in these wars, but it certainly draws conclusions from them for its own ambitions and aspirations. By trading with Russia in areas ranging from natural resources to dual-use goods, China helps Moscow mitigate the effects of Western sanctions and consequently continue its war effort. It is paying very close attention to how the United States and its allies respond to these conflicts, especially to Russia's war against Ukraine. So the question to support or not to support Ukraine can also have an impact on Taiwan and the security situation in the Indo-Pacific. What happens in Europe doesn't stay in Europe, and vice versa. What happens here also affects Europe. This interconnectedness is in global trade, of commodity markets and energy prices, of domestic consumption, and of the international order calls on us to cooperate. We are in this together. We need partners even more than ever before, reliable partners, especially in a world where autocracies are on the rise, where more than 70% of our global population do not have the privilege to live in a democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the world as it is, not the world we would wish for. There are many ways to take action, but business as usual is certainly not one of them. What does this mean for us? I would like to focus on 3 points. First, security in Europe and security in the Indo-Pacific are two sides of the same coin. This is evidenced by how much of a difference Australia's support has made on the battlefield in Ukraine. From day one, you have supported our Ukrainian friends, and you are the biggest supporter of Ukraine outside of NATO. For that, we are extremely grateful. You took a stance and made it very clear to Russia. The international community does not accept this illegal war. Australia stands strong in the face of Russia's atrocities. And the international orders matters to Australia and other partners in the Indo-Pacific, regardless of whether it is being attacked in your own neighborhood or on a continent halfway across the globe. Looking at the other side of the coin, we as Germans and Europeans understand that a failure to address the challenges in the Indo-Pacific will embolden authoritarian regimes and undermine the credibility of the international order. Our primary geographic responsibility, of course, remains Europe, especially in light of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Yes, in an interconnected strategic environment, geographic distance must not be mistaken for strategic irrelevance. A truly comprehensive European security approach must comprise Indo-Pacific security as well. To Germany, partnerships beyond Europe are a strategic necessity. That is one of the reasons for this trip, which first took me to Japan and Singapore and now to Australia. And that is why we started our Indo-Pacific deployment in 2021. Deploying our frigate Bayern to the Indo-Pacific was a visible sign of Germany's willingness to contribute to maintaining the freedom of navigation and to upholding the rules-based international order. This deployment, the first of this kind for the German Navy in almost 2 decades, saw the Bayern passing through the South China Sea, conducting exercises with allies and demonstrating Germany's commitment to the region despite the vast distance. That is also why we participate in Air Force exercises in Australia. With Pitch Black 2022 and 2024, we invested in interoperability with our partners in the region. In 2024, we increased our presence. During the Indo-Pacific deployment in July 2024, I visited the frigate Baden-Württemberg and the combat support ship Frankfurt am Main off the coast of Hawaii. As part of our renewed engagement in the region, we participated together with Australia in the multinational RIMPAC exercise. By crossing the Taiwan Strait, our Navy also sent a clear signal in support of freedom of navigation. We also showed our capability to deploy our Air Force in different theaters around the globe. And this year we will once again take part in the prestigious exercise Pitch Black 2026 with 9 Eurofighters. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our Australian friends for your great support as a host nation throughout the years. Furthermore, together with you, we are participating in the Pacific Security Maritime Exchange to enforce UN sanctions against North Korea. This shows our commitment to upholding international norms and to taking on responsibility with a global security architecture. Building on these experiences, Germany will send a maritime patrol aircraft and parts of a sea battalion to the Indo-Pacific in 2027, and in 2028, we will again participate in RIMPAC. All of these deployments, joint exercises, as well as our diplomatic presence and economic engagement, foster cooperation. They build trust. They strengthen the ties with our allies in the region, and they enhance collective security. They also strengthen our relations with a crucial player in the region, the United States. To me, one thing is crystal clear. Without a strong US presence, the Indo-Pacific would be less safe for us and for our allies. We will remain engaged in the region out of a deeply held conviction. A peaceful Indo-Pacific is in Europe's interest, and it's in Germany's interest. My second point concerns our approach to security issues. Resilience and deterrence are crucial for our security. This is all the more true in a world characterized by global interdependencies and geopolitical competition. Germany has taken enormous steps in the past year to build up its deterrence. We have drastically increased our defense spending. To do so, we took a huge, historic step. We amended our constitution. And this speaks volumes of how serious we are about our commitment to security and defense. We will reach our new defense spending target of 3.5% already in 2029. We reformed our military service law. This will lead to much stronger active forces and a more resilient reserve. We are meeting NATO's targets on investment, procurement, and readiness. We have significantly scaled up investments in our defense industry, expanded production capacities, and streamlined our procurement processes. In everything we do with regard to defense, one thing is clear. Our goal is to protect ourselves and our partners and allies in Europe. We will not act alone. We will always coordinate with our allies as a reliable partner. The task at hand for us now is to adopt a more resilient, coherent, and capable defense posture, one that can absorb shocks and reflect the full spectrum of European security issues and interests. To be honest, this is quite the balancing act. On the one hand, it's of strategic importance for us to keep the United States engaged. We need them to be on Ukraine's and our side in the confrontation with an aggressive and revisionist Russia. And for the foreseeable future, the US nuclear umbrella is indispensable for effective deterrence. On the other hand, we have to stand on our own feet more and more. Our American allies want to see a European-led NATO, and we have acted and are acting to build a more European NATO, a NATO in which Europeans bear the brunt of conventional deterrence and defense. Or in other words, NATO has to become more European in order to remain transatlantic. Ladies and gentlemen, strong defense capabilities are only one of the many aspects of resilience. Another important aspect is a strong and resilient economy. Having reliable access to resources is crucial. Russia's war in Ukraine had us cut dependency, especially in fossil fuels. We had to learn the hard way that our dependence on Russian gas was a strategic vulnerability. This is why we quickly diversified our energy sources and expanded our use of renewable energies. In the same vein, we need to reduce supply chain dependencies when it comes to, for example, semiconductors, rare earth, and pharmaceutical products. For Germany, this is particularly pertinent given our high level of dependence on China and other countries. In all of these areas, we are looking for partners such as Australia, who are willing to work with us based on mutual interest and a shared commitment to economic resilience. The trade deal and the security and defense partnership between Australia and the European Union are great and very important examples for this deepened partnership. Building a strong defense industry at home and working with key partners across different continents, from Japan to Singapore to Australia, is part of this economic resilience. Our goal is to increase the capacities of our defense industry. We achieve this by being a reliable partner and procurer at home, and by supporting our industry across the globe. This is why it was important to me to bring leaders from some of our key defense companies on this trip to the Indo-Pacific, sitting over there. With Australia, we can build on our cooperation on the Boxer vehicles, which has deepened strategic ties between our two nations. My Australian counterpart, Richard Marles, and I just signed a joint letter of intent which helps us strengthen our cooperation in space to enhance situational awareness. I firmly believe that this type of cooperation among middle powers across different continents will make us stronger. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings me to my third and last point. In times of great power competition, it is on us as middle powers like Australia and Germany to uphold the core principles of the international order. Imagine, just to have a picture in mind, imagine you are watching a German soccer match. Just imagine, for a couple of seconds. The rules are clear. No hands, goals count between posts, 90 minutes of play. Quite easy, at least from our perspective. Now imagine that halfway through the game, one team suddenly changes the rules. They pick up the ball, tuck it under their arm, and begin charging down the field, tackling opponents along the way. At that moment, the German fans would look at each other in complete confusion, because what started as a soccer match has suddenly turned into footy. Many Australians might say, "What's the problem? That's not a bad thing." The problem is that if you change the rules in the middle of the match, the game falls apart. The same is true for the global order. Rules, institutions, and agreements were not created for their own sake. They only work if the large majority of our nations abide by them. As an export-oriented nation, Germany's security and prosperity greatly depend on stability, depend on freedom of navigation and respect for international law in and around Europe, in the Indo-Pacific, and across the globe. These core principles are enshrined in the UN Charter: prohibition of the use of force and respect for sovereignty and international law. And this should apply to each and every one of the 193 members of the United Nations. The good news is our network of defenders of the rules-based international order spans across the globe. After my visit to Japan and Singapore before coming here, I am now reassured that middle powers in Europe, in the Western Hemisphere, in Africa, and in the Indo-Pacific can and must make a difference when it comes to upholding rules and principles of international politics. Who else would do it? We are all determined to defend these principles because they help us protect our freedom, our sovereignty, our territorial integrity, and, at the end, our prosperity. To do that, we have to unlock the potential of our partnerships in trade and investment, in science and technology, and in particular, in security and defense. And that is, ladies and gentlemen, why I am here. Ladies and gentlemen, geographically, Germany and Australia are literally a world apart. But in today's world, as I mentioned earlier, distance matters less than ever before. Strategically, our two nations are extremely close. We share democratic values, we depend on open trade routes, we believe that sovereignty and territorial integrity are non-negotiable. This week's journey has shown me once again, time is pressing. Together we must write the next chapter of the international order. Across the globe, Germans are notorious for their efficiency. Australians are at least known for their optimistic attitude towards life. Let's combine German efficiency and Australian optimism to build a safer and more stable world. Let's use our synergies. Let's deepen the trust between our nations. And let's shape the international environment so that it better represents what we stand for: reliability, strong rules, trust, strong rules and institutions, trust, respect for each other, and the determination to shape our future together. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your address and the questions that you posed and the plan that you have in your mind about the optimism and the efficiency. We'll see if we can implement that with the questions today as well. But look, firstly, I wanted to hear from Professor Rory Metcalfe from the ANU's National Security College for your reflections, Rory.
Look, thank you, Anna. And Minister, I think that was a very illuminating speech. I think it was a very timely speech. I know there are many in the room here and around Australia watching this that will be very appreciative of the frankness with which you spoke. So just to set the scene, my organisation does a lot of the education for the Australian policy community on national security, and we increasingly engage with the Australian public and the community as well. I like your optimism about Australian optimism. I think there's a lot of truth in that. What we are finding, of course, is that concerns of security anxiety are rising in this country, as they are, I think, in all of our countries. I will maybe say one or two remarks about how I see your assessment fit with the strategic challenges that Australia faces, because I think the spirit of your remarks, Minister, that there is enormous convergence between our nations and what has often been potential convergence can now become reality in cooperation, I think is absolutely on the mark. The Australian situation, as you say, if you put the map upside down, We're at the top, and we're in the Indo-Pacific, so we see the global strategic challenges through that Indo-Pacific lens. But we're looking both regionally and globally at the shocks and the risks that you identify. And I think that although for some years now there's been, frankly, quite a China-centric set of concerns in our region and in Australia's strategic outlook, we're also acutely conscious of the great power competition, tensions, disruptions, and worse, and of course the theatres of war, the multiple theatres of war we now see in the world. The first question I might pose, if you don't mind, Anna, I'll pose one or two questions to the Minister before opening it up. The first question I might pose goes to the direction of travel that you've articulated for Germany, and you've positioned that direction of travel to Germany as a more capable, confident, resilient security partner for us all in the broader context. The work that's happening in NATO, the work that's happening in Europe. There's a lot of applause in this town at the moment, in this country at the moment, for the free trade agreement and the defence and security agreement with Europe, though there's now great work to be done. The direction of travel's clear, but it's not going to be easy. And I think in terms of the two things, I think the acceleration of defence expenditure and investment, building capability in Germany on that extraordinary time frame to 2029, 3.5% in 2029. And I know there are people in our defence community who are thinking, how can that be done? But also the recruitment of personnel that you need, including among across your society, young Germans, voluntary military service. It would be useful if you could identify what are some of the key challenges on both of those areas, accelerated defence expenditure and recruitment, and how are you meeting those challenges?
Well, to be honest, it's a long way to go, especially when you look at the history of Germany during the last 35 years since the unification of Germany. We passed a period, a decade, more than 2 decades, in the belief that we are living in a peaceful, more peaceful world with a Russia as a coexistent neighbor. And we reduced our armed forces heavily. We saved money as much as possible. And the result is that we have the smallest Bundeswehr ever in history. We used to have. We are now increasing again. We have a rising number of applies of young people for the armed forces. And we are doing everything to even improve it more. And we are successful for the moment. We don't need whether that will last or not. If it will not last, we need to think again about conscription, but this is not yet the point. And at the same time, the biggest challenge is mindset and population. I think this is in Australia very similar. We need to wake up the society. I created a word in 2023 which called in German kriegstüchtig. I mean, ready for war, not in the sense of willing and wanting having war or going into a war, but being able to fight a war in order to avoid a war. So, and this word I used really shocked the society. A defense minister using the word of war readiness. A social democratic defense minister even more. So there was a heavy discussions, serious discussions going on. But meanwhile, the mindset changed a lot. I don't repeat that word any longer so frequently because the discussions speeded up. And now it's about getting the mindset changed in the society about a threat which is there, which is Russia. At the same time, we have the most important ally of Germany in NATO in history, the United States, which are not as predictable as they used to be before, to be diplomatic. So this is a collective with a very severe consequence for what are we going to do in Europe within NATO. And many people, I always name my daughters. They are 34 and 35. They never experienced the divided Germany. They never experienced the Cold War. They had nothing to do with a military threat in any manner. So to make this generation get more aware of the threat we are facing now and for the foreseeable future is really a challenge. But we are doing that, and we are successful as far as I'm convinced. And the third challenge is to procure. To have the money is one thing, and we are spending this year more than 108 billion euros for defense, and to do it efficiently, effectively, and very quickly. 2029, you mentioned it, is not like a year in which the war really might come, but it is possible. So we need to be prepared then, and therefore we are in a very close cooperation with our defense industry. We are doing everything to speed up, to ramp up as quick as possible, but still everything needs to be produced before it can be provided and used by the armed forces. So I think these are the three main challenges we are facing, and I think this is quite similar to Australia. So we are very close to each other.
Can I just make a comment building on that, and then I might go to one more question before we begin to open it up. There's so much there that does resonate, I think, with the challenges in Australia. So my organisation has recently conducted opinion surveys across this country, 18 months worth of surveys that show that although we believe in no worries, we have optimism, that culture is changing. There is rising security anxiety. 2/3 of our population say they're concerned about national security. More than half the population now say that they want the government to tell them more about the risks and the challenges that we face. And I think the theme that's emerging is that theme of preparedness. We won't perhaps necessarily talk specifically about war readiness, and of course we need to be prepared for multiple threats and contingencies, not only military conflict. But I think the other challenge we face is that, as with Germany, we're a federation. We're both great democracies, and we're democracies with a diversity of political perspectives, and indeed increasingly moving beyond what we've had here for many years as a two-party political system. And in Germany, I know the politics of this is challenging and complicated. So perhaps any comment on how you navigate the politics, whether it's federally as a democracy or whether it's across the diversity of the federal system?
So one thing is quite easy in Germany. Defense and foreign policy is a matter of the federal state and not of the lender of the federal states. It's a task. It's the isolated and only exclusive task of the federal German government. So there's no participation of the federal states. And still, the discussion is going on. And as you mentioned, in our polls, we can see the same results. People are more and more convicted that we need more money to be spent for armed forces, that we need to do more for defense and deterrence, and to make clear as possible that there is a threat. Because there are still people in Germany and in Europe who deny having a threat. Russia is a friend, China is only a partner, maybe a rival, but not dangerous. So there are still political moods in which you really find that opinion. So therefore it is about clarity in the speech we use. It is not about sugarcoating, beating about the bush. It is really necessary to make absolutely crystal clear what we are talking about without making people getting frightened or whatever, but to make clear there is a threat and our joint responsibility is to face it and to accept and accomplish the challenge. I don't have a recipe for doing so. We are just working by trial and error.
I want to acknowledge we have a lot of esteemed people in the room who've been involved in decision-making in Australia when it comes to defence, including a former Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull. But when it comes to the current situation that we're in, you're talking about a defence spending target of 3.5% by 2029. Do you see Australia, given the clear and present dangers ahead of us, as needing to kind of match that? Do you see Australia as needing to turbocharge what it's doing with its budget?
It's not upon me to judge that, to be honest. I mean, 3.5% is a huge amount of money for Germany. And we only can afford that, achieve that by amending the constitution. It is not money which is there, but it is money which we get by debts. So it is really a challenge for the future generations too. So it's not upon me to say, okay, Australia needs to spend the same. What I think Australia is doing quite clearly, that it is defining and specifying the challenges which are different from Europe, and at the same time similar when it comes to really have a clear picture of the threat. So the one thing is a threat, and the other one is how to challenge, how to address it. And the measures in which you can do that are different from the one in Europe or in other regions of the world. But what you certainly need is, like we do too, is really the courage and the resolve to speed up as quickly as possible.
Okay. First question from the floor is from Matthew Knott.
Nice to have another opportunity. Thanks for being here. Germany's president said very clearly the other day that he believed the US-Israel attacks on Iran were illegal. Do you agree with that? And what are the consequences for democracies like Australia and Germany? Does it make it harder for them to say the rules-based order matters if the United States doesn't care about international law anymore?
In the first second in which you started your question, I would have liked to thank you for the question. But I'm not sure whether I should be grateful for the question. Because, well, our president highlighted an assessment which we all have in mind since the war started. And many, many people, experts and non-experts, questioned the Rechtmäßigkeit, the legality of that war. But to be honest, that is not the question we need to answer now. It is only a proof, one more proof for the way in which the rules-based international order is questioned. And I remind you to the speech of the Foreign Minister of the United States in Munich when he said, if the international organizations fail to solve those conflicts and situations, then we will do it. I mean, this is what I just explained with regard to that soccer game being changed to a footy game. I mean, this is dangerous for the international rules-based order. And what we see is, and what concerns me the most about that war is, there was no consultation, there is no strategy, there is no clear objective, and the worst thing from my perspective is there is no exit strategy. So whether it is or not, I mean, the doubts about the legality of that war are laying on the table. Everybody can discuss it. But this is not the moment for academic discussions. It's about solving problems and getting to the end of the war.
Our next question is from Ben Packham.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Ben Packham from The Australian. I understand you're visiting the Boeing facility tomorrow to have a look at the Ghost Bat, and that Germany is having a look at that, potentially buying that. Could Germany become the first international customer for the Ghost Bat? And secondly, that's quite an exquisite, uncrewed capability that's being developed there. What is Germany's approach in terms of balancing out the high end versus the cheaper uncrewed systems that potentially you can lose on the battlefield and not have to worry too much about?
To the first question, you never know. I mean, we have competitors all over the world, and particularly in that issue, there are German companies, we have Boeing, we have Airbus, we have other companies who are really developing good stuff. So I couldn't give you a serious and reliable answer now, and I'm not allowed to, otherwise I would get some problems with our lawyers.
But it's under consideration.
So of course it's in consideration. What we did in Germany during the last months is we modernized our procurement processes. We started, for example, procuring loitering ammunition. And in former times we would have done that like we see who is offering what, making a contract for 5, 10 or 100 years, and then paying and waiting for the material. And what we did now is we tested what they really offer. So not only their papers or images and videos, we tested them. And then we decided, okay, we go with you for the next milestone and see what's going to happen. And if you are successful, we will continue contracting. So, and I think that makes quite clear we need to have more competition in that market, much more, and therefore I'm very keen on seeing that. And we are comparing. We have our experts, we have our companies there, and we decide then in time. The second question,
the high and low end, in terms of the capabilities.
Since I'm not a military expert in the literal sense of the word, I would say, okay, we need a reasonable and healthy mixture of both. We can't decline the right word, verzichten? We can't ignore high-end products as well as low-cost products. We need both, I think.
We'll hear from Kim Bergman.
Minister, willkommen in Canberra.
Danke.
Und danke für die Rede. I hope I thanked you for your speech and not simply...
Did he? Is that what he said?
Yeah, that's perfect. No accent, not at all.
Good, because with poor language skills, I was worried that I thanked you for your crocodile or something like that. I'd like to take you back to Europe, because in Australia, the Russian invasion of Ukraine seems to have become the forgotten conflict. Can I ask you for your assessment of how that conflict is playing out, and what more middle-sized countries can do to support Ukraine?
To be honest, I don't know where this is going until the end of the year, but what I think is a critical year for Ukraine. Not because of the successes of the Russian armed forces on the battlefield, these are really rudimental, but due to the fact that the United States lowered the sanctions against Russia. Due to the war in the Middle East, the prices for oil and gas are increasing. So a double impact, positive impact for Russia, which is really critical when it comes to finance. Let Putin finance his war against Ukraine. So I don't know where it is going to end until the end of the year, but it is critical. And what I'm even more concerned about is the fact that Donald Trump, the American administration, seems at least to lost a little bit of interest in dealing with negotiations about a ceasefire or peace in Ukraine, which would be crucial, at least for Ukraine. So what it needs now is to hold on supporting Ukraine by material, which is challenging for every country because the stockpiles are quite challenged, and the industry is not yet capable to produce much faster than before because it needs time to prepare that. And at the same time, the second is money. Money to enable Ukraine to produce more in its own country. They do have capabilities in the defense industry. They are very creative when it comes to drones and mass production of in many fields. So to provide money, be it for Pearl, the NATO American system, or be it directly so that Ukraine can really spend this money very effective and efficiently.
Danke.
And by the way, third point is not stop talking about Ukraine. I mean, they are fighting now in the 5th year. Nobody had expected that before. And this is really a brave people in the brave armed forces, and they need every support, not only in material, but also psychologically, and in terms of solidarity, declared and clear solidarity.
Thank you.
We did recently have the Ukrainian ambassador here at the club again, so we have certainly had a chance to hear from him too. Corrie McLeod.
Thank you very much for your address, Minister. You referenced earlier in your address about the information or battlefield experience that's being shared between Russia and Iran. We know that the war between Russia and Ukraine is the first time data has been really a core central part. And speaking with the ambassador when he was here last month, asking about Ukraine making available that data intelligence to partners and collaborators around the world. So my question is, what is Germany doing with unlocking and learning from that data in being part of that resilience? And I guess another question is Australia part of those conversations, and should they be?
Well, in my discussion with Richard earlier this morning, we agreed upon dealing more together in that issue too. Getting closer when it comes to exchange of data, exchange of what we can do to support Ukraine and what can we get from Ukraine, not in a material sense, but in sense of learning by their experiences on the battlefield. And what Ukraine is really doing, and we are very grateful for that, we have been successful in creating a win-win situation. We have built many joint ventures between Ukrainian and German companies producing material in Ukraine and in Germany. We learn from their experiences in terms of drones, counter drones, operating drones, and very, very crucial in terms of data. Data about systems like Patriot, systems like IRIS-T, which is really crucial for the air defense of Ukraine, both Patriot from the US and IRIS-T from Germany, which are, I think, the most sophisticated system in air defense in the world. But we have never been able to, fortunately, never been able to have experiences on the battlefield with that systems. And now we get the information, we get the data, and the companies can improve the technology of these systems. And this is very important for us too. And at the same time, we learn very, very much about resilience of the armed forces, the society, the creativity and the speed in which they are able to improve their capacities and their capabilities. But to come back to your point, data is crucial, and I invited Richard to join that and to benefit of that too.
Thank you.
Just as we wait for Tom Larry to come up, Rory, I don't know if you have a short comment on that. Are there risks for Australia and our sovereignty on this front?
Well, no. Well, I was just going to make 2 points. One is, my working assumption. In fact, I think it's pretty clear that the Australian Defence Force is trying to learn as much as they can from the Ukraine battlefield through a variety of partners, and that now is an obvious time for us to be being ambitious about intelligence sharing beyond our traditional Five Eyes partners. I think the risks can be managed.
Why do you see a risk there?
I'm just curious because it is something that does get raised in Australia about the risks associated with sharing intelligence beyond Australia with Five Eyes partners and beyond, where that intelligence may go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some of the details might be sort of not for the television, but we'll,
as is always the case.
Please, Rory, feel free. Minister, thank you so much for your visit to the Press Club today. Germany is, of course, along with Australia, a signatory to the UK-led statement on the Strait of Hormuz that was published late last week. I wanted to ask if there are any limits to what Germany is willing to provide and support to reopen the Strait, and are you open to this being perhaps a months or years-long effort that could be required to keep the Strait open once we do see tensions start to ease?
To be honest, that's a view into the crystal ball. I mean, the war is not at its end in any way. And what we made crystal clear together with Australia and other partners, we don't want to get sucked into that war. We won't engage in that region militarily as long as the war is ongoing. After a ceasefire or a peace, of course, we can imagine and are willing, basically, to join an operation to secure the freedom of navigation via the Hormuz Strait. But this is not the point to discuss it. I mean, the United States demanded from Europe to take more responsibility for their own conventional deterrence and defense. They demanded that we need to ramp up to achieve 3.5%, and some voices in Washington even said, okay, take care of your own backyard in Europe and don't mix up with us in the Indo-Pacific. That was before the war started against Iran. Now the arguments are different. Now they are saying, where are you? You are cowards. You don't help us. I mean, we haven't even been consulted before. Yeah? And I'm sure we wouldn't have started that war. But now we have the war, and what is not crucial for us as partners who rely who stay committed to the rules-based international order. We can't just go to the next agenda and say, okay, it's happened, so we take part. We wasn't consulted before, but now we get in. No, it won't happen. But afterwards, we can discuss everything. But to be honest, the possibility to keep close the Hormuz Strait is the sharpest sword the Iranians have. So it might be very difficult to deal with that.
Thank you very much.
Next question comes from Jason Katsoukas.
Minister, thank you very much for your speech, and I thank you also for your faith in Australian optimism. But I wonder whether Australian politicians of the centre-left could ever govern in coalition with their main rival from the centre-right, as you are doing in Germany right now. So how does this arrangement really work? And is it a sustainable way to keep parties of the far right, such as AfD in your case, and perhaps One Nation in our case, from governing?
First remark is it's a fantastic coalition. It couldn't work better. Of course it could, but it is really every coalition can work better than it does. So no, it's okay. We are working fine, but the challenges are real multiple. At the same time, we have economic challenges like not a recession, but no growth in economy. We do have migration issues. We do have demographic issues very seriously. So we do have some ball in the air. I don't know, do you say that? Yeah, okay. This is quite challenging. At the same time, the majority of this coalition is not that strong. And we see AfD growing in all the federal states of Germany. They just achieved 20% in Rhineland-Pfalz, which is a small federal state of 4 million inhabitants, something like that. And in all the polls on federal level, we see them by 25%. This is really a lot. And this is concerning us a lot because they are non-democrats. Some say they are fascists. I wouldn't say that in that clarity, but they are at least far right, extreme right, most of them. So they are a threat for our democracy. And they are a threat for our bounds when it comes to our alliances or our memberships, like in European Union, in NATO, but also in our partnership relations with all the partners around the world. So what we try is to make our politics as good as possible, to find good solutions. Sometimes I wished it would be a little bit faster, but it's difficult because right and left, not far right, but right and left, there are some experiences, some traditions of coalitions like that, but in these times it's even more challenging because we have the pressure from far right, from AfD, and at the same time from far left, increasing too, but not as much as AfD and not as dangerous. Dangerous enough, far left anyway. So we do have that certain situation like a sandwich. Right, left, and in the middle, that coalition, and in between the Greens, 2 members of parliament are with me on this delegation. The others couldn't because they need to stay in Berlin for a parliamentary session. So they would have come probably too. But anyway, this is quite a challenge for us, but we are working on that. And still we are, I think, one of the most stable governments in Europe.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from Julie Hare.
Minister, thank you so much for coming to the Press Club. My question is very long and I apologise for that. It's to both you and Professor Metcalfe, if that's okay. So here we start. Ursula von der Leyen was in Australia this week to launch the Australia-EU FTA and also to announce that Australia would finally become an associate member of Horizon Europe, the world's largest research fund. Australia only came to Horizon Europe after 10 years of lobbying by the EU, and it only came about because the group of 8 universities were prepared to stump up the entire $40 million as an entry fee, and the government finally put in $20 million of revenue-neutral money that will come from other parts of the innovation sector. Currently, Australia's spending on R&D is 1.66% of GDP, half of Germany's. Joining Horizon Europe will have no impact on that figure. You spoke of global connectedness and the importance of a strong and resilient economy to national security. You also spoke of Australia's natural optimism being a great balancing act to German pragmatism. could you both please reflect on the integral importance of R&D on national and global security and whether Australian optimism will compensate for lack of investment?
Okay.
I might kick off. Is
Yes,
that right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure.
Julie, I might pick up the ball first, and a bit like the footy soccer thing, there are no rules. There are no rules for this one. That's where I slightly differ from your assessment, Minister. That game you're talking about has no rules, and that's the danger of the breakdown of a rules-based order. It's not transferring from one sport to another. It becomes a struggle. So I think in this more contested strategic environment where we are, I think, dealing with a potential failure of rules in the international order, we do need to marshal all our resources as a middle power democracy. And I agree with the philosophy behind your question. Of course, Australia needs to lift research and development spending as part of a broader national resilience effort. But I just add two caveats to that. I think one is that although the argument might be made that our involvement in Horizon Europe, and full disclosure, I work for one of the group of 8 universities, and I think it's going to be great to have Australia in the tent with Horizon Europe. While that may not make such a fundamental difference in the aggregate, it will have a very powerful demonstration effect about the diversification of partners for our research. You know, there's been a very artificial debate over the years. Is it all the US? Are we getting too close to China? I think this makes a very powerful difference in the demonstration effect. And secondly, I wouldn't treat R&D as the only education-related investment in national security. Education is a national security investment. With that, I will hand the ball to the Minister.
I have nothing to add.
Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Got to welcome back a former president of the National Press Club, Laura Tingle, to the microphone.
Thanks, Anna. Laura Tingle from the ABC, Minister. You mentioned stockpiles earlier of weapons. I just wondered, there's been assessments published in the last few days which suggest that the use of air defence systems in the Middle East have basically depleted both the US and other countries' supplies of these weapons to a critical stage, that some places may only have a matter of weeks left of supplies. There's also been alarm expressed about the knock-on effects that might have in the next couple of years in theatres like the Indo-Pacific around Taiwan, for example. But presumably also it affects the capacity of, say, the US to supply Ukraine with some of these weapons. I'm just wondering what your assessment is of whether that's a realistic assessment and whether that has changed the German demands on its industrial base for the sorts of weapons that it should be producing. Obviously, companies like Rheinmetall have been looking at sort of heavy industry, tanks, the like. But are you switching more to the sorts of weapons we're seeing in such use in the Middle East conflict, like drones and anti-drone weaponry?
Thank you for that question. I think that it is a serious challenge to decide what we do in the 5 or 10 years to come. When we have a look into the Middle East, and we see that the Gulf states used more interceptors, Patriot, for example, in just a couple of weeks than Ukraine in more than 4 years. And we see that we have a capacity problem in the industry, and that occurs in many other fields of defense industry production too. This is a problem, and we are working on that. And at the same time, we don't know yet, and we can only try to anticipate what is be needed the most in the next 5 or 10 years. Of course, on one hand, we will need tanks. We will need manned aircraft. We will need tons and millions of artillery ammunition. But at the same time, we will need drones. We will need to integrate artificial intelligence. We need unmanned aircraft. We need new kinds of systems beneath and in the water. And at the same time, the most, from my perspective, very important challenge and issue is to increase our investment in science and research. Because I think we lacked that engagement in the last decades, for the same reasons for which we neglected our armed forces. So we need to make a 180 degrees turnaround to make that happen now as soon as possible. And learning from the battlefield in Ukraine is crucial for that challenge too. So what are they doing? What are they experiencing? What are lacking the most? Which role do play tanks really on the battleground? I mean, in the first years, it was the Leopard tanks and others. First time, by the way, in history of Leopard tanks being proven in our battlefield. So this is what we have to elaborate about in the months to come. We won't be able and we must not repeat structures and systems of procurement like we used to have in the decades before. We need really to change it. And that means to see what's going to happen in the Middle East. What about the reliability and the dependencies on, for example, other defense industries? And here we come again. We need more allies and partners beyond those with whom we have been working with in the last decades. And more industrial cooperation, more interoperability. We have still a huge lack of that. I mean, we had in Europe at least 2 dozens of different types of 150 millimeter ammunition. Crazy. And we have to change that as soon as possible. I hope I understood your question correctly.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Joseph Albrecht Palmer.
Thank you, Minister, for your address. I just wanted to touch on the defence partnership that was announced earlier this week. We didn't get a whole lot of detail in the Australian press on the actual tangibilities of that. I was just wondering how Germany views that agreement, what Germany's role is in that.
The EU.
And also, on interconnectedness, perhaps a question to you both. You touched on, I would suppose, autocratic regimes sharing intelligence. How big of a threat is that to Australia in the Indo-Pacific with China? But also, does Germany need to share more intelligence with Australia and vice versa?
To start with the second question, I think we need to do more. I mean, Australia is part of Five Eyes. Australia is a like-minded partner and NATO a like partner. So we should really do whatever we can within the framework in which we can afford that. But we should do that. I'm absolutely convinced. And at the same time, looking at China, Russia, Iran, we don't really know what they do exchange, how much China really trusts Russia and vice versa. At least I don't know. I have some thoughts in mind, but we don't know.
Would you like to share that?
No, not yet. But I think we should, and this is an example for shifting our focus. We used to focus and always have a look on what is China doing, what is Russia doing, what are the US doing. Okay, they are the superpowers in the world, but all the middle powers all together, sticking together, being reliable with each other, and being committed what they want to achieve are at least as strong as those. But that demands unity and resolve. And in that framework, we can achieve a lot, but only if we stay focused on ourselves. I always take the comparison with an abusive or toxic relationship. If you always are focused on the adversary or your partner, it depends sometimes, you're only focused on them, you never act in your own sovereignty. You are manipulated by fear. And decisions made on the basis of being manipulated by fear are always wrong decisions, ever. And at the same time, the other partner in that relationship will never respect you more than before if you act like this. So if you don't love yourself, you won't be beloved by others. And if you are not confident towards your own strengths, nobody will fear your strengths. So it is more about who we are and who we are committed to each other and how self-confident we are.
Can I just add briefly to that? I mean, I think the the plea for greater sharing of particularly intelligence assessments between middle power democracies, and especially Australia and Germany, Australia and other European friends as well, is absolutely well founded. I think if we're trying to make sense of this strategic situation, we can't be living in the kind of echo chamber that we have lived in, where sometimes, although we get high quality assessments from a lot of our friends, traditional friends and allies, they're often too familiar to our own thinking. And so I think seeing the way that Europeans, the middle powers, are seeing the deep threats is very useful for us to share. On the point of what are the authoritarian powers doing, particularly the question of the China-Russia relationship, it's not only in intelligence sharing. You know, Russia is an actively disruptive power in the Indo-Pacific, and it takes relatively small investments, whether it's in information operations or interference or some rather unpleasantly creative strategic diplomacy that we see in Southeast Asia or elsewhere. The Russians are harassing our Japanese friends every day in the airspace, for example. So we need to be sharing notes with our European partners at all times on these issues. And going, Minister, to your point about the role that Germany and Europe can play for stability in the Indo-Pacific, it is multidimensional. I don't think anyone in this room has an expectation that Germany as a frontline military power is going to make the difference in the Indo-Pacific, but it's the everything else that you bring to the table, you know, including whether it's in information intelligence, in technology, in economic deterrence, as a trusted partner for other democracies that will be part of the solution.
If I may, this leads us to a point which is even more critical because we are not used to it. In former times, it was quite clear. There is a tank crossing a border. There's an aircraft attacking any target in our countries or whatever else. And we knew, or we would have known, we are in war. But this is different nowadays. We have attacks we can't really attribute. We don't know where's the cause, who is the penetrator or whatever you call it, and why is he doing? And are we already in war, or shouldn't we rather not escalate? What is the right measure of reaction? So this makes it so difficult in a relation or in a competition between authoritarian regimes and liberal democracies. We are not able to go just to make just one step and we are in a war. So if Russia is attacking us in hybrid warfare, disinformation, fake news, sabotage, and whatever, we need to have a certain certainty. Is it a war? Is it an attack? Do we go into the war or not? So, and this is why we need more exchange in terms of intelligence, in terms of what is going on around the world, because it's about a 360-degree situational view we need. And even, especially therefore, we need a closer cooperation between countries like Australia and Germany.
And sorry, and just on the tangibility.
We've just got one final question. We want to give everyone a go, but thank you.
Dankeschön, Minister. When you were young, you served in a flak battalion defending against planes. Has the advent of drones completely changed warfare? Is this something democracies understand?
Yes.
And that's a great way to end. We thank you so much for your time, for this frank and sobering assessment, for taking all of our questions, and we look forward to seeing where you go next.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All the pleasure, Brendan.